Well, okay, so Dark Knight Deep Dive was a wild ride here. A really wild ride. And woo, it was, yeah, interesting and compelling. I'm going to try to actually stay a little bit on target, almost like an outline today, but we'll see. What I wanted to begin with, as always, but I feel compelled to really emphasize it, um, that I am speaking from direct experience. And because of that, it may or may not match or link up or align with, or however you want to look at that, resonate with your direct experience. So I'm never saying ever that my way is the highway. I am reporting from direct experience, and when I look into like something like The Dark Knight and begin to read John of the Cross and like all the stuff, it really resonates with me on the like say, if we were talking about eating a peach, okay, then I'm looking at these writings and stuff going, oh yeah, they obviously have too. But it's not like it's word for word matching, or I'm ever encouraging anything other than all of us finding what is true for, for us. I'm never advocating ever, no matter what my words might sound like, that somebody hand over their spiritual authority or personal autonomy to any teacher or teaching, and not to me. So it's not theory, it's not philosophy, it's not dogma, it's just my experience. And I would love to, at the end of our time together, when you guys have a time where you can step into the guiding role and the teaching role, to either ask questions or even debate, I don't, whatever, or explore on some other level, or just report or share. That's all very essential to this. So, on that note, there are many I found out accounts of and descriptions of the Dark Knight. And that wording, since John of the Cross in somewhere between 1542 and 1591, when he passed on, when I can't remember the exact days he was in prison writing the Dark Knight poem, but since he coined this phrase, you might say, or lived this experience is a better way of saying it, I think, it has taken on a lot of connotations, I found, right? So we could be using the words the Dark Knight for just kind of all kinds of things. I think a lot of people are using it to reference a very challenging time, or a crisis, a depression, a psychological depression. And it's not that it doesn't include that. In fact, all of those things are generally the catalyst for what I'm going to term the Dark Knight. So, it continues to evolve, right? This wording. And I'm just going to read, how what I'm speaking of today, attempting, is the dark night itself is like an evolutionary spiral that every time we get settled or comfortable or thinking that we have somehow landed in our spirituality, the dark night comes to shroud darkly whatever we have previously known and move us off our ledge or landing zone, the place we're currently hoisting our flag, and sort of kick us back into the unknowingness. And so even after, all the readings I was doing had a real tendency to outline a very linear process, which, I mean, all of you know me, that's never going to work, because I'm, like, for me, it's like, yeah, throw a little green, throw a little red, throw a little blue. At the end, I've got something, and I go, yeah, that's the dark night. I mean, I just don't know how it all lines up in time. But what I do know, as far as my own experience, is that even after, we might say, the condition of no self, the dark nights continue to spiral and do exactly what I had just said. Shroud anything that happens to be taken on as knowingness and a new level of the mystery is compelled to embody. It's compelled to embody. A lot of the accounts of this, and just letting you guys know this in case you go to kind of read about it on your own. Maybe some of you know a lot more about it than I do, or did. I did a lot of reading, which is odd for me, the last month. But they stop at the radical ontological existential shift that is often termed no self. And that's not the experience here. That is not the experience. I mean, currently, I'll just be really honest to begin this discussion. Currently, the experience here is a dark night of I have nothing else to compare it to. It's so dark. So, and the condition of no self has been lived now for, I don't know, maybe 10 years or something. So my point is, we don't know. That's the bottom line. And there are these processes within creation and spiritual realization that are inherent to the process. And they are just as eternal and infinite as everything else in that dimension. The spiral is never, it's eternal. The unknown is eternally and infinitely knowing itself through creation, evolving itself through creation. Just a tiny bit of history. The term does come from St. John of the Cross, who was he's the patron saint of mystics. Love that. Did not know that. He lived from 1542 to 1591. He was a Christian mystic poet, a collaborator with Teresa of Avila. And during his lifetime, curiously and interestingly, it was a time of great upheaval. Huge, chaotic upheaval in all societal norms. It was the Reformation. of society, the church, all kinds of things. Things were being broken down in order to break through in some kind of evolution. And he and Teresa were very much interested in the church going back to its roots of poverty, charity, ditching the opulence. He considered himself a guide, not a spiritual director. A very humble position. That's what they were interested in, the discalced Carmelites, which means Carmelites without shoes. And he went to prison for it, of course. And while he was there, he wrote this poem that has guided us through this particular level of consciousness for centuries now. One particular translation of it that I found to be very more resonant with the language of today, and I can put all this in an email to you guys that are on the deep dive part of the website, is Mirabai's Stars translation of The Dark Night. Because trying to get through it in some of the translations was like, wow. But through increasing opposition, misunderstanding, persecution, and imprisonment, he came to know a new way, a new condition of being. A new condition of being that he termed the Dark Night. I think it is worth, even though I don't really want to just push it out there as a line that we follow, I think it is sort of worth going into some of the terminology around it. What they generally begin with, let's say, is there's an event. And for many of us, most of us is what many of the spiritual teachers talk about, but I would say most, but not all of us, there's an event that is like a crisis type event. Something unexpected and not your regular challenge. And in response to that event, we begin what we might call the active dark night, which is an admission that we don't want to find ourselves on this same road, falling into this same hole again. And so we're going to look into what actually really drives us. And like a lot of us will find paths during this time. Yoga, the Enneagram, AA, whatever, the paths that many of us follow to begin this inward journey to try and uncover, what am I? Who am I? The existential questions of our being. So we're actively seeking, you might say, God. That word's real prominent in my consciousness right now because I've been reading Christian mystics, but whatever word you want to use is fine with me. If God has the overtone of the white patriarchy, that has relaxed for me. I don't have that reaction in my mind anymore, but I know that can happen. So source, creative, ground of being is a little too hard to say over and over, but we begin seeking it. The seeker is engaged. The seeker of truth is engaged. And it's a very active time, and it's usually in response to deep pain and a knowing that I can't keep doing this. I can't do it. And so we seek. And in that seeking, many things are revealed by our soul because we've knocked. Help. Our soul starts to kind of sweeten the pot, even in the midst of the deep pain. And we find, hopefully, spiritual companions to dive into. We went on a journey of archetypal discovery, several of us, with Carolyn Mace, and we began to explore the psyche through archetypes together and kind of say things to each other that, the sincerity starts coming online, and we're doing this active thing. And in the meantime, in the dark, in the quiet, in the unknowing, the soul is eroding the center, you might say. And so while all the time we're sort of adding to, and I'm this, and I'm this, and our self-image is expanding to and I'm something beyond my thoughts and feelings. I'm bigger than that. There's more to me than that. The whole time we're doing that, the unknowingness, the dark, and I don't mean the shadow of the psyche. That's not what I'm referring to right now. And I'm not referring to the unconscious. I'm referring to the great mystery that is always giving itself as us. But it's mysterious. It's hidden, you might say, but it's not, because every single thing we see is it. So hardly hidden, really, but feels that way because it's not actively driven by this center of that, is right down here, this pick me up by the bootstraps, go on a program, start seeking. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with it. We might call it the ego, the seeker, the self we have kind of built through identification and definition. That center that we sense as a myself, that's in this kind of center of consciousness, is being eroded, dismantled, dissolved by the passive dark night, which is our source seeking us. And you don't really become aware of it, or maybe you guys are good at it and did or have been or whatever. It took me by a big surprise. That during this active, a big thing happened here in this case, a dramatic life event, and I felt helpless in the face of it. And I began to question how God could even allow it to happen. And it engaged this seeker energy inside of me, where I started to really crave actually going in and discovering what makes this whole thing tick. And during that time, there was still a very, very solid seeker self, ego self, whatever you want to call the process, this feeling we have kind of like between the solar plexus and the belly button of a will, a source, a sense of willfulness and, what gets us going. The idea maker, the strategizer, all that. I mean, it's all great, especially when it's turned towards God. And I equated, I don't know, maybe this is not your experience, but it was many of the people I read. I equated that center that I had sort of tuned into and dropped into for most of my life to improve my condition and the conditions of others too, as kind of God, my center, the intuitive powerhouse center. And then, while I was sincerely and honestly seeking this operating system, you might call it, this system of navigation began to unwind. And I kind of had a sense of it, but I was still very much seeking and, living from my sense of myself. And this unwinding, this inability to navigate in the same way would kind of almost come over me as like there would be something I would need to respond to or react to, and I would move to the center to discover, a better way, and it would be sort of, unavailable. I'd go to read a self-help book or my daily lesson or my homework for my study group or and I couldn't even read the words on the page. And it was very curious, and kind of alarming to me because I've always considered myself quite intellectual. And so it was like, and I'm a nurse, so it was like, am I having TIAs? Am I going crazy? What's happening? Well, that operating system, that center, was giving way. Like a dam, right? Like the water is pushing, and little leaks are starting to kind of spring through. And then, one day, not long after a very dark unknowingness came over my intellect where I really could not navigate in the old way. I couldn't make sense of words. I did not have the same, I couldn't reference inside, which was very, very different. I could not reference inside. Something gave way at the center not long after that. And here, it was a shattering. It shattered. It was excruciating to look inside and see no nothingness. Nothing. Not me, not God. Nothing. The empty unknowingness. This is the dark night of the soul. Because I'm going to read something that I discovered that just said it so perfectly from Ram Dass. If one has spent their whole life becoming somebody and having something, and then with awakening you turn around and you start the journey in the other direction of becoming nothing, becoming nobody, and having nothing, it would seem to make the whole first part of life meaningless or some sort of error. But it's important to see that this sequence is a necessary sequence, that when one takes incarnation, in that evolutionary moment when one is going to awaken, you still have to become somebody and become grounded in this somebodyness on earth before you can do the spiritual work. So each of us is involved in will we, won't we, can we, can't we, should we be, shouldn't we, and all that. And with awakening, one begins to see the way one has been trapped in that. But it doesn't mean that it was meaningless or that the story ends. The story is alive and well. It's just framed in a question. Whose story is this? But at first, that sense of absence, the absence of that somebody we were. And you know, during this time, loads and loads and loads of life circumstances can change, and it can be really tough. Many people's lives go into not everyone, but overdrive with like change of spouse, change of house, change of occupation, change of, up is down, da da da. Bodily changes by the score. Because see, it's like if you pushed your finger through the center of a piece of paper and all those remnants, those raw edges, have to still be illuminated by this dark illumination, this dark radiance, this nothingness. So for a period of time, you know, what one might call the radiance and illumination of the ground feels like an empty absence at the center. It can feel really excruciating and very existentially disorienting. It's a radical ontological shift. It's a change of occupancy. So that's kind of how we distinguish it also from psychological depression, you might say, or just a deep challenge. Not exclusive of that, but so I'm trying, you guys, I'm giving it a good go to stay on track. At some point, this sincerity, hi Marge, and willingness has eroded enough of the me center that the center actually gives way. And in a lot of cases, but not all, is kind of shattered or burst open. The area of personal seeking, personal will, personal referencing. It's not there. And the knowing mind, at least in this case, and I, not in every case, but was really plunged into darkness. And by darkness, I don't mean, well, I've been explaining what I mean by the darkness, by the unknowing, kind of like a shroud of unknowing, a cloud of unknowing. Also, in this shattering of the personal will, there's kind of an experience of one's helplessness before God. It's very humbling, because all this while we've been actively seeking and, kind of acquiring, actually. And this is when we deeply discern through the experience itself that the process of spiritual awakening is anything but acquiring. It's a dismantling. It becomes more and more and more and more naked, impoverished. But we sense it directly and begin to experience it with that, what Sharon Landreth always calls the first essential shift, and what in this particular talk I'm calling the dark night of the soul, because that's what we're talking, we're using that language. It can also be really painful for some folks who have had a very deep relationship with God as another, God as the other. Because in this shattering, in this giving way at the center, the me is no longer there. And the me that was seeking God, the God is no longer there. And I'm not saying that the ground of being from which all comes, it never goes anywhere. But our notion of separateness it's gone. It's gone. And it can feel grievous. It can feel grievous. I'm not sure many people talk about that because we're all really looking for the state of bliss. On some level, I was. So we're just coming to terms at that point with the impermanence and emptiness of the ego self, of the center of willpower, ego willpower, and the seeker and all of that, that we defined as the center and myself. We are coming to terms with the no-thingness of that, the emptiness of it, the impermanence of it. And that, it too, is a process and part of this archetypal spiral of the dark night, the descent. So it's felt as an absence, maybe initially, maybe not, often. A darkness, but it's really a radiance beyond notions of dark and light. And we begin to see that as we are has this new fire. For me, it was a time of fire after the initial bomb was dropped in the center, and the absence and the no-thingness, the helplessness, the humility before God, the loss of what I had perceived as me, what I had perceived as God, began to sort of fill in with this fire of the divine unitive flame, where all things started to burn through, all the remnants of what I had believed to be self. And unlike, in some of this reading, I can't remember where, somebody said, when you stare directly at the sun, your vision goes dark. And I thought, yes, exactly. It's a darkness, it's an illuminative, radiant, flaming darkness. And we have a period of adjustment where we learn to navigate without a personal will. And for a lot of people that I've seen and have come for some guidance during that time, that it can just feel bereft. You go to look for what the next move is from this place that you always used to strategize and move from, and you're met with the empty center. So it's kind of a process, or at least in this case, of watching, honestly, how the life goes right along without the doer and is actually a very, whatever is animating, giving life, the ground of creation, is quite trustworthy. Essentially and fundamentally, the trust begins to go home and rest. Time of fire, and as that fire sort of moves in to the center, you might say, change of occupancy, the unitive consciousness comes online. That not only do we see that we are something far beyond our thoughts and feelings and personal will, and beliefs, what we might call that package of an ego, self. We are one essentially with the great mystery, creative mystery. That is what we are fundamentally. And this consciousness dawns, and especially as we continue to kind of burn through any of the deeply, deeply seated, rooted pieces of separation, what Sharon Landreth calls the precious pearls, are real deep identities. I am an intuitor. was one of mine. I am an intuitive person. I am a lover. More and more and more in this process, this time of fire, cremation is an apt word to describe this direct experience. It was a crematorium. That's why I think the archetypal image that led the way for me was Kali, which it isn't for everyone, and thank God, right? Maybe your patron saint doesn't have to be the goddess of the crematoriums in India and the yeah, she's fierce. That archetypal energy is fierce, and she's the destroyer, the dissolver, the mistress of death. But we know at that point that the ego has, for the most part, died. And yet, we're still walking, talking, breathing, living, functioning in our roles. It's disorienting. It is shrouded in mystery and unknowingness. It's radiantly dark, but it's also incredibly liberating, because that whole backpack of I am this, and this is what I do, and this is how I behave, and this is how my life looks, and this is how I need to respond, and all this stuff is busted through. Which is, like we've been talking about, simultaneously. It has a lot of ins and outs and what have yous, because the life generally changes dramatically, the circumstances of our life. It can be a real rock and roll show with all kinds of things coming home to be loved, to be loved, to be loved, to be loved. And the capacity to love is growing, growing, growing as love continues to sort of erode the self. The self. And it kind of, what did I write here? We begin to identify with the holy fire, the divine flame. Identity radically shifts to that from which we come, the love that lights the world, all of existence. And the flame of the eternal heart, the holy fire, burns and shines and illuminates all the dross, obscurations, false notions, and mistaken identities. Process of purification or cremation, burning the mistaken identity to the ground. It's a time of deep surrender and radical awakening, oneness, love, union. My Creator and I are one. But as expanded and empty as the center has become, the remnants of me are still intact, and the center continues to, through this process, dilate, you might say, like a cervix. So, like you have the center that has now become totally empty of this notion of separate me, seeking God. It begins to dilate through our life experience and through this fiery time of burning through and oneness. It's a matter of years, really. Maybe not anymore. Who knows? Everything's up for reformation. Generally. Generally. I remember Adya saying one time that he's never really seen anybody sort of stabilize in this for, like a decade. I think things are kind of changing around all of that because, we all can feel what this time is requiring of us, right? So, chop chop is kind of how it feels like what the universe is saying here. Anyway, it does take some time. It takes time for a woman's cervix to dilate. It takes time. As the center, if you could even call it that anymore, continues to erode and dilate and empty. As we surrender deeply and more deeply and ever more deeply and deeply to the unknowing, the dark. And we cast in our precious pearls, we come across a piece of separateness and we give it away, give it away, give it away now. And so there comes a time, maybe a moment. I know we've been sitting a long time, guys, but I just want to and then we'll take a break. You can kind of feel something coming, I guess you might say. There's a stillness and a silence, and one craves that giving away to it. One time I went to a Sharon Landreth retreat, and the retreat leader was so absorbed in the dark, quiet, silent awareness that is the empty center, that he would come out of it and go, okay, you guys kind of need to go over here for lunch or do this, and then he just sort of dropped back into it. Sharon was looking at him I'm not sure how this is going to work, but it gets real still in the face of all kinds of coming and going, upheaval, revelation, and challenge, and living. And I liked what Bernadette Roberts, I listened to so much. I went back and revisited Bernadette Roberts for a full week. It was just lovely because she was just a glowing torch for me during this time, because I just resonated so deeply with everything she said, and not everybody does, but it very deftly described my experience, much of what she had to share. And one thing she said is, and before I say this, I want us all to remember what I said in the beginning, that this is not necessarily a linear process, and I'm sort of speaking of it as, okay, active night of the senses, passive night of the senses, dark night of the soul. Now I'm going to go on to talk about what I'm calling dark night of the spirit. Remember, reality is fluid, creative, dynamic, spiraling, anything but linear. However, in time, it often plays out the way that I'm speaking about it, just because of the process of it. The baby is born at the end of the dilation process. You know what I'm saying? So she said, whereas the dark night of the soul is this living flame of oneness burning through our false um, let's not say false, are mistaken identities. The dark night of the spirit is when the flame goes out. And that brought me to my knees. In this case, that was as unexpected as anything. I had not heard about it, read about it. I didn't know anybody who had talked about it. I called Sharon Landreth immediately, and luckily she was there and she knew what I was talking about. And it doesn't have to be as, like I said in the beginning, I'm speaking from direct experience. It's all I can do. Your way is your way, and it's divine, and it's gifted, and it's written, and it's your destiny, and it's as gorgeous as every flower blooming in the garden. But also, if I can share, maybe for that person that does have this journey, they won't be caught so unawares. This is what I consider to be the ashen bone phase, where something I wrote during that time is, this dark night is dark, empty. I don't have any stories to tell. I don't know what is in need of purification or how it will be purified. There is no revelation, no intuition. There are no edges. There is no in. There is no out. There is no center. Now there is no center, no outside or inside, no edges, no circumference, no self. I've come to realize through, and like I said at the beginning, the dark night spiraling hasn't stopped in the condition of no self. It hasn't stopped. There are still that eternal, infinite process of love refusing any other destiny other than infinite, eternal love is still in process. We're all human. We're all embodied, and love seeks to embody at deeper and deeper and deeper and more profound and more evolved and more creative levels of consciousness, always. So why would the dark night just end at the no self condition? And in my experience, it hasn't. It's a gift, and you start becoming accustomed to the flow of the shroud. I guess somebody called it the cloud at some point of unknowing. The times, you might say, of total darkness, where the mystery is discovering itself more deeply, and the way of surrender, I guess you might say. It's hard to put into words. We can't, by definition, understand what is happening in a dark night because it's dark. It's unknowing. It's mysterious. It's of that dimension of beyond, beyond, as the Buddhists say, gate, gate, gate. And maybe some of you experience it more gently. It took me a while. And if I can say that, maybe it would help somebody else. It did not feel gentle to me. I didn't understand the dark night, from the beginning. You know, even through the senses, through the soul, through the spirit, whatever we want to call this, beyond the 10th ox herding picture. But I have begun, and there's an understanding here now of the rhythm of it, and the trustworthiness of it, and the divinity, and grace of it. And that's not to say that it can't be excruciating. One of you here, told me recently that it was, excruciating existential terror, the particular dark night that you were experiencing. Yep. So, before I let us break, I really do want to kind of open this up and just plant a seed in our group and in our consciousness that doesn't this look really relevant for the process of our collective humanity right now? The darkness, the unknowing, the absence, the grief, the transformative, transmutive quality of it, the radical ontological shifting. And if we can, become aware of it on that level and in that dimension and stage, you might say, we can begin to see it personally and collectively as the gift that it is. Which is not to say it's easy. But it's a context that is full of hope and grace and is trustworthy as a archetypal blueprint, you might say, that has been lived and written about and talked about for a long time. So I'll end. I wanted to So from Bernadette, this journey then is nothing more, yet nothing less, than a period of acclimating to a new way of being, a time of transition and revelation as it gradually comes upon that which remains when there is no self. This is not a journey for those who expect love and bliss. Rather, it is for the hardy, who have been tried by fire and have come to rest in a tough, immovable trust in that which lies beyond the known, beyond the self, beyond union, and even beyond love and trust itself. Bernadette Roberts. And that, what she's referring to, this creative, participative participatory, I don't know the right word, reality. If we're really, really going to begin a discussion about what some people are calling co-creation, what I would maybe call miracles, because there's no ego co-creating with God, the source of all, the source of ego, the source of God, the source, the ground. It is from the place of, if it could be called a place, unknowingness, that these miracles will come. So this new way of, it's truly a new and fresh way of being and living. As all of us move and journey and are led and birthed into this, a new day is dawning, because it has that flavor, guys, of born again. I mean, I'm calling it a radical ontological shift, which sounds a little bit clinical, but if you want to talk about it from a, I mean, I would tell Tim all the time, sorry, but I'm a born again now. I know you didn't plan on it when you said I do. But this is a new thing, fresh. We could say evolved, but, you know, the word is written from the beginning and the end. It's all here now. John of the Cross. Let me read one more thing. I am going to let you take a break. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming. What did he say? I bolded it. It made an incredible impression on me. John says that the Father, and in this case he's going to use the word Father because that's from his time and place, but the cosmic parent of all, the Godhead, the ground of being, spoke one word, which was his Son. We could say which was his creation, which was the creation. And this word is always spoken in eternal silence. And in silence must it be heard by the soul. Amen. Okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for being part of that with me. And I'm so excited to hear what you guys have to say.